I'm very happy to present the next speaker of this presentation. He has left an indelible mark on history as part of an Abraham Lincoln tradition of truly connecting the Americas to Asia with the Bering Strait Bridge and/or tunnel. So let me introduce the renowned international engineer Hal Cooper.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I had the unique honor of driving from North Dakota, so I missed all of the activities at LA Airport yesterday. The only problem we had on Interstate 40 was that there was a truck had turned over near Flagstaff, Arizona, and that delayed us for all 5 minutes. Harley and Michael asked me to give some of my thoughts about John Kennedy. I went to my undergraduate school at the University of California in Berkeley, and many of the people who served in the Kennedy administration came from Berkeley. I had grown up and been conditioned by my mother and father, who came from Southern California and La Cañada, Flint Ridge, which is a very different political environment than today. The right-wing John Birch Society was in power at the time. And when I went up to Berkeley, I was told that all these people were evil and so forth. But as I got more acquainted with it, I changed my mind. I remember very well November 22nd, 1963. I had classes in the morning. I went up to the student union, and I ran into the then girlfriend of my roommate, and she said, "President Kennedy's been shot." And I said, "Oh my God." Well, a half an hour later, it came on the PA system. He died. And I had this terrible feeling of what was going to happen in this country. And sadly, those fears came to reality. The war in Vietnam started. I and numerous others faced the draft. I was very fortunate that I had a deferment while I was in graduate school at the University of Washington, a master's degree, and I stayed there just long enough to get over 26. And the entire time of the Vietnam War, I sampled in a relatively dangerous job of sampling smokestacks at pulp and paper mills. But I remember President Kennedy. It was a time of optimism. It was a time of happiness. It was certainly a time of scientific and technological progress. It was a time of hope for the future. And when he died, it all died with him, philosophically. And all of us today suffer from that. And it's very opportune that this group is really the center of trying to restore what President Kennedy was trying to create. And it's our duty now to carry on what he started. Well, I'm going to talk basically about a presentation that I actually gave 9 days ago in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, to a very different group. It was the Saskatoon Economic Development Association, and I talked on the subject of what do we do to transport oil, what do we do to build railroads, and are they an alternative to pipelines? It will probably surprise you to hear that in Canada, and especially in the province of Alberta, which is the Texas of Canada, it's the economic powerhouse of Canada, they are very, very worried about their economy today. Why? Because they have all this oil, and they're wondering, how do we get it out of a landlocked place? Everywhere they're trying to build a pipeline, somebody's trying to block them. Out to the west, northern gateways, to Houston, the Keystone XL, to eastern Canada, Ontario, and Quebec. What are they going to do? Well, I presented what they can do. First of all, build a railroad up to the Arctic Ocean at Inuvik and ship it out by sea. You still have problems with marine oil spills. You can ship it to Hudson Bay. Do the same thing. You have another problem with marine oil spills also. But the thing that makes the most sense is to haul it by railroad to China in a tank car and don't ever take it out of the tank car. Seems logical, doesn't it? But you have to build something first. It's called the Bering Strait Tunnel. But in a very non-humorous way, who's going to become the biggest advocate of the Bering Strait Tunnel? The oil and gas industry in Alberta. Why? Because their survival is going to be dependent on it. And think about it, how that's going to change. I mean, is there an industry that's the essence of the British oligarchy? Is it called the oil and gas industry? You better believe it. And then we have Prime Minister Harper trying to carry out their wishes, and he's running right straight up against the economic interests of where he came from the University of Calgary. So there's a very interesting political dichotomy beginning to take place. And it's sort of like what Vladimir Putin gave to Barack Obama 2.5 months ago. It's a way out. And what is the way out? Probably not more pipelines in the future. It's building the Bering Strait tunnel. Now, once we build it, we haul everything through it that we can. And what we'll end up is we're only going to have so much capacity. Now, I didn't include in my presentation there, and I'm only going to minimally mention it here, because this group is the center of the advocacy of magnetic levitation for the world. If you want a political support group, you're here with it. Now, Elon Musk up in the Bay Area, who has the good fortune to have more fortune than most of us in this room, at least until his stock on Tesla drops. Yes, has proposed this elevated tube concept with an evacuated tube for magnetic levitation where trains will go at 1,000 miles an hour between the Bay Area and Southern California in 30 minutes. We can probably include that with the Bering Strait tunnel to get to it, because it's probably the only way, but it's a little bit off. Elon's costs may be a little optimistic, and his projections about how long it's going to take and the difficulties are probably a little bit rosy, but he has a good idea for the future. But we've got to deal with the present, which is why I'm here tonight. We have to build the rail network in northwestern North America. And we need to duplicate what is already going on in Russia. The British oligarchy attempted to stop that. Putin said, not a chance. And the Chinese backed him up. And that's good. But what we have to be really thinking about it is an immediate development of oil. I'm working in North Dakota now, and when I'm there, we don't have any idea what economic problems are that the rest of you are talking about. Well, we have economic problems. People can't find a place to live. Anybody can find a job. Believe it or not, on the Dickinson radio stations, half to three-quarters of the ads that are on every day are people looking for workers. You don't find that in most parts of the United States, for sure. But we do there. And it's a totally different environment. And it very much, there's money in the economy, people are optimistic. It's sort of like what President Kennedy wanted. Well, Michael suggests that I be a little sparing about what I say about the Monterey Shale. I'll get to that later, but I will only say a little bit, except that without nuclear power, we're not going to develop it. It's a very interesting dichotomy. But we do need to get the Bering Strait tunnel developed. Why? Because it links the United States and Canada with Russia and China. And that creates an entirely new Pacific global interface and interaction and alliance, and eliminates the need for the old Atlantic one, which is only designed to serve the oligarchy that Harley very clearly identified. I also want to suggest, although it's not the major thrust of this presentation, that we consider not only going to the northwest up to the Bering Strait to connect with Russia and China, but that we build to the south through Mexico, Central America, to South America through the Darien Gap. And there's already been some papers written and published about that by myself and others. And oil and gas figures into that too, and especially with the new president of Mexico, President Nieto, Peña Nieto, really promoting development. Now, my concept for the railways in northwestern North America is one of corridors, right away 100 to 500 feet wide, double track electric lines, maybe two sets, one for passenger, one for freight. Electric transmission lines, not only above ground for the local area, but underground superconducting cable. Gas and oil pipelines, gas certainly. It's hard to transport natural gas very much by rail. You've got to liquefy it, and then you've got to re-evaporate it. Oil is increasingly being shipped by rail, certainly out of North Dakota it is. That's going to continue in the future. I'll discuss the Keystone Pipeline in a minute. But probably what's going to be most important in the future is water. What are we going to do about water? Because Canada has lots of it. Now, the environmentalists say, well, the Gulf Stream is slowing down because we have water that's got not enough salinity in it, and we have too much fresh water going into the Arctic Ocean. That sounds like a good argument to build Nawapa, doesn't it? And that means out of the Yukon and Mackenzie rivers. And in Russia, the Lena River, Kolyma River, Ob River, all are candidates for moving water south. And of course, it's always pointed out the RLC project didn't work because it was supposed to take water and move it in there, and it didn't. Well, actually, they never moved the water there, and it didn't work because there wasn't enough water. That needs to happen too. And it's in parallel to what's happening in North America, or should happen in North America. I won't get into electric generation too much, except in the northern tier areas, which is Alberta, Saskatchewan, North Dakota, Montana in particular. It's to a considerable extent coal. We're having some inroads in natural gas. The renewable energy lobby wants us to build wind power, which is great, and it provides maximum power when it's needed least, and least when it's needed most, which somehow doesn't seem to worry the people promoting it too much. But we really need to have a focus on all of northwestern North America. That means North Dakota, Montana, South Dakota, Idaho, Washington, Oregon, Alberta, British Columbia, Saskatchewan, Alberta, maybe Manitoba, and then Nunavut, Northwest Territories, Yukon Territory, and Alaska. All those need to be involved. And it has to affect all of them. The Nunavut region and the Northwest Territories are primarily Native people. They're not white people so much. Now, in Russia, you have some similar there in the Sakha Republic and Chukotka, which have large Native populations. I work on the Fort Berthold Indian Reservation in North Dakota, so I'm getting very familiar with how things operate there. We, of course, have the Bakken Formation in North Dakota, and going into Canada, we have, of course, the tar sands and all that. You know, it's really a short-term fix, but it's a pathway to the nuclear economy that our next speaker is going to talk about, believe it or not. And it all really centers on Alberta. It's the Texas of Canada. It's the richest province. It produces the most income, and it's also now, because they've spent a lot of money and natural gas prices dropped, they're now in deficit. Very much unlike North Dakota and Texas if it wanted to be. Alberta has placed great faith in oil development and also in pipelines. The Northern Gateways and Keystone. Keystone, when I got my invitation to attend this conference in Saskatchewan, the director of the association sent an email to me asking me, were you going to focus on President Obama's approval of the Keystone Pipeline in October as the centerpiece of your presentation? And I sent an email back saying, no, I'm not. And I said, I don't know that what you're proposing is going to happen either. Especially when we consider who's the real opponent of the Keystone Pipeline. And the answer is Warren Buffett. Now, why is that? Does he own a railroad called the Burlington Northern Santa Fe? It's hauling huge amounts of oil. Oh, yes. In fact, my driving out here from Albuquerque yesterday, I saw 3 oil trains carrying oil from either North Dakota or Canada to the refineries here in Southern California. So it's obviously important, and we'll be seeing more of it. We can't rely on oil for the long-term future, but we need to deal with it in the short-term present. And we don't have to worry about marine oil spills. But we're going to need nuclear power to make it work, even in the short term. In Alberta, believe it or not, several years ago, the Areva company from France was asked to do a feasibility study on building nuclear reactors to serve the steam requirements of the Athabasca tar sands oil development. And their conclusion was it would work. But there was a problem. The 6,000 megawatts of electric power that was going to be generated by the nuclear reactors, because they didn't reconfigure the reactors so that they would produce mostly steam and not electricity, the conventional design, was going to displace the entire electric generating capacity in Alberta. And the existing utility said, not a chance. That's not going to work. So the whole thing died. Now, let's go up to today. Where would we need the power that was generated by 4 nuclear reactors producing 6,000 megawatts of power? And the answer is that's the power you need to pump the water from the Yukon and Mackenzie rivers to the south. Okay? Now, do we need water? Yes. We badly need it here in California. We need it on the Great Plains too, but especially here in California, because no new use can occur without taking it away from an existing use. And there's no way to solve the problem with only the water in California. And what are we going to do when we want to develop the Monterey Shale? Well, the oil producers can buy out the water from the farmers, no problem. But then what do we do for food? I gave a presentation on this project, believe it or not, at the Oil Logistics Conference in Houston in March. Oil people, not LaRouche people, oil people. And the last question was not a question. A woman got up and said, Mr. Cooper, it isn't going to do us very much good to all be rich from our oil royalties when we're starving because we don't have enough food to eat because there's not enough water. And that's exactly what the situation is we're talking about. So obviously they get it, and they're ready for something new, which is very interesting because those are the people who are going to need to be convinced if anything is going to change. Now, we talk about the rail system. It's to a great extent non-existent in northwestern North America. There are small railroads like the Alaska Railroad from Seward up to Fairbanks and a railroad going up briefly into the Northwest Territory, but we need great expansions of that. And we need to use the model that's already been developed in Russia. They have already built, and is running now, from Skobrodino, the Trans-Siberian Railway, all the way up to Nizhny Besya across the Lena River from Yakutsk. And their question now is, do we want a bridge or do we want a tunnel over or under the Lena River? And there's arguments in both directions. The bridge advocates say build a bridge, and it's probably cheaper. But, you know, it's cold, and in the wintertime, it'd be a lot easier to be underground at 70 degrees above zero than underground and be 70 degrees above zero than up on the rail line at minus 70 degrees with ice in a storm. And that problem is magnified with the Bering Strait. And so you don't want to build a bridge there. The Russians said it's going to be a tunnel or forget it. And those of you who got to live in cold climates like I do now, you probably better pay attention to that. The second phase of this proposal to build out to the Bering Strait goes to the Magadan region from the Sahara Republic. There are design studies going on that. They've raised some of the money, although not all. But interestingly enough, there was a conference held in August of 2011 in Yakutsk. And the Sahara Republic government told the federal government of Russia that any money that you are short in building this railroad, we will sell enough diamonds to make up any difference. So they solved the financing problem. Now the third stage would go from Magadan to the Kamchatka Peninsula and then down the Kamchatka Peninsula. It's an isolated area. It has a large city at the southern end, and there's lots of resources there. So that would be the third part. This is in a 5-year increment. And the final part is to build out through Chukotka to the Bering Strait at Ulen, which is across from Wales, Alaska. Now, we will need to build to Fairbanks from Dawson Creek, British Columbia. That's our first step. Then we need to build out to Wales, Alaska. But we also need to build in the Northwest Territories up to Inuvik and a place called Tuktoyaktuk, which is the big ocean port on the Arctic Ocean, which is increasingly open. And then lines in Alaska to Prudhoe Bay and to Point Lay coalfields, ship coal to China, at least temporarily. It's low sulfur, it has less emissions, but really China has already decided its real future is going to be nuclear power. Now, one of the things that can happen is resource development, and if a line is built down into the Yukon Territory to Whitehorse from Inuvik, it goes through the area where the Crest iron ore deposit is, which is supposedly the largest deposit of iron ore in the world, very high quality. So that's another resource possibility. They are now looking at oil development of what's called the Canol, C-A-N-O-L formation in the Northwest Territories. In fact, at Fort Berthold, we hosted a delegation from the Northwest Territories of First Nations people 4 weeks ago. And in fact, I met with two of the representatives of that this morning in Riverside. So these are actually, bringing resources, bringing oil, bringing things back and so forth, trying to create an economic case for the Bering Strait Tunnel. But my personal belief is, having seen what's happened, and something when I did this feasibility study back 10 years ago, believe it or not, and nothing has happened since then, not even studies. Nobody's done anything except this organization. That it is apparent to me that from what I heard a week ago in Saskatchewan, that there are people who really need this now. And we need to look at Plan B and Plan C and not just at Plan A. And I want to emphasize, we're not going to get this done if we don't have nuclear power supplying steam to get the oil out in Alberta, along with figuring out what to do with the electricity. And that means pumping water to the United States from Alberta and the Yukon Territory and the Northwest Territories, Yukon and Mackenzie River, and of course from Alaska also. And I suggested, and I'm again proposing tonight, that there be an international commission set up of Russia, China, the United States, and Canada to look at the overall question of economic development in northwestern North America and northeastern Russia. The focus of that will be oil and gas development and mineral development and the Bering Strait Tunnel. That we need it, and we need it right away, and it's going to be very important for the mutual development of all the economies. And it's surprising that one who particularly needs it is Alberta. And they'll probably, once they get away from their present thinking, and of course they've got the same problem everybody else does outside the LaRouche organization, is they accept the sweet tranquility of the status quo, which doesn't work anymore. So we're really at a point where we would establish a corridor across Northeast Asia, and in Russia, the word corridor means magistral, Northeast Asia magistral. We would have a Northwest America magistral, and in between them we would have the Bering Strait Tunnel. And then we have the other lines connecting. There's a proposal to build, well actually it goes back to Stalin's time in the 1930s, to build a railroad across the northern part of Russia, as well as to the southwest, such as I'm proposing. The studies were all done. They were for the non-sociological reason of connecting concentration camps at that time, but of course the world has changed, fortunately, from that time. China is really going to be probably the most important of the countries besides the United States, but Russia is a very critical part, and so is Canada. And I think Canada needs this worse than the United States does. And it's going to have to abandon its precept for the British oligarchy to do it. But it's going to need to be done if they want to keep their economy in order, especially in Alberta. But that really affects all of Canada. So we need that, I say as a first step, an international commission. When and whether we will get that, I wouldn't hold my breath till President Obama does it unless he's forced to. Maybe those of us in this organization can get the message back to Vladimir Putin to make Obama another offer that he can't refuse, and maybe he'll go along with it. And at that, I think I'll stop and thank you very much.